At exactly 4:17 a.m. in the morning, a 22-year-old university student walked into an Airbnb apartment in Nairobi, alive. On CCTV, she looked calm, normal, maybe even hopeful. Less than an hour later, her body was lying on the ground outside the building. And the man she had gone to meet? He told the police she jumped. But then detectives watched the CCTV footage again and again, and the autopsy report came back. Broken hand, fractured legs, blunt force trauma. Injuries that experts say happened before the fall. So now investigators are asking a terrifying question. What really happened inside apartment C601? This is Crime Dopers, and today we're talking about the death of Constance Githinji, alias Connie.
Twisted tales in every folder. Truth runs hot while the trail gets colder. Crime Dopers, we don't look away.
Hi Crime Dopers, welcome to today's show. I'm Wanja. Before we begin, I need to say this. This episode discusses violence against women, alleged murder, and graphic forensic details. Please listen with care. Now, if you've been online in Kenya over the past few weeks, chances are you've seen Connie's face, a young woman. Bright smile, university student, only 22 years old, and her death has shaken people deeply, not just because of how horrifying it was, but because of how familiar the warning signs feel. A dating app meeting, a short-term rental apartment, a man she barely knew, a late-night meetup in Nairobi, and almost immediately, people start asking, could this have been prevented? Because here's the thing. At first, the story sounded straightforward. Police were told a young woman had jumped from the 6th floor of an apartment building in Kileleshwa, a suicide. Case closed. Except the evidence didn't match that story. Not the injuries, not the room, not the CCTV footage, not even the timeline. And today we're going through everything currently known about this case. The overlooked details, the contradictions, the unanswered questions, and the disturbing timeline investigators are now piecing together. Before we talk about the apartment, before the CCTV footage, before the autopsy report and courtrooms and headlines, we need to talk about Connie. Because true crime has a bad habit of turning victims into plot points. And Connie was not a plot point. Her full name was Constance Githinji. Most people call her Connie. She was 22 years old and studying health records at Murang'a University of Technology. 22. That age where life still feels like it's just beginning. You're still figuring yourself out, still making mistakes, still changing your mind about your future every other month. Friends and people who knew her described her as social, warm, approachable, the kind of person who laughed easily, someone who blended into a room naturally. And when you look at the photos circulating online after her death, she looks so young, not in a dramatic way, not in a poetic way, just young, like someone who should have had years ahead of her. Now, according to reports, Connie had traveled from Murang'a to Nairobi to meet a man she had been speaking to online. And honestly, that detail hit a nerve for a lot of people because it's such a normal thing now. People meet online every single day. Dating apps, Instagram DMs, TikTok mutuals, WhatsApp conversations that slowly become something more. That's modern dating. And from what investigators believe, this was supposed to be the first in-person meeting. The man was identified as 33-year-old Tony Odhiambo, also referred to in some reports as Tony Odhiambo, 11 years older than her. Now, here's something I kept thinking about while researching this case. Connie probably did what so many young people do before meeting someone for the first time, picking an outfit, checking her phone repeatedly, wondering if the vibe would match the conversations. You know, that nervous energy before meeting someone you've only known through a screen. That feeling of curiosity mixed with caution. And there's one detail from that night that has stayed with a lot of people. Just hours before her death, Connie reportedly posted a mirror selfie from an elevator. The image spread online quickly after the story broke. And what disturbed people wasn't the picture itself. It was the timing, because in that moment, she looked completely unaware of what was coming. No sign of panic, no visible distress, just a young woman out at night in Nairobi. And of course, we have to be careful not to romanticize social media post after tragedy. A smiling photo does not automatically mean someone was okay emotionally, but investigators and family members reportedly pointed to her behavior that night because the initial narrative pushed by the suspect was that she had taken her own life. And the family rejected that almost immediately. They reportedly insisted Connie was in good spirits and had future plans. That matters because families usually notice changes. They notice withdrawal, silence, emotional shifts. And publicly, there has been nothing suggesting Connie intended to harm herself. Actually, the deeper this case went, the less the suicide story made sense. But at this point in the timeline, none of that had happened yet. At this point, Connie was just another young woman moving through Nairobi before sunrise, probably thinking she'd go home later that day, probably believing she was safe enough. And this is where the story becomes deeply uncomfortable, because many women listening right now have done something similar, met someone new, trusted a conversation, entered a building hoping for a normal night. Which is why Connie's story stopped feeling distant for so many people. It felt possible, and maybe that's the scariest part. By the time Connie arrived in Kileleshwa, Nairobi was in that strange in-between hour, not fully asleep, not fully awake either. The roads are quieter around that time, but not empty. You still find boda-bodas passing occasionally, a few clubs winding down, security guards fighting sleep at apartment gates, and somewhere in the middle of all that, Connie arrived at Kaisa Gardens, a modern apartment complex in one of Nairobi's more affluent neighborhoods, the kind of place people associate with safety, short-term rentals, Airbnbs, weekend stays, people coming and going at odd hours. Nothing unusual about that. Now, according to CCTV timelines reviewed by investigators, Connie and Tony arrived at approximately 4:15 to 4:17 a.m. That timestamp matters because almost everything investigators know about the final hour of Connie's life comes from surveillance footage. No long eyewitness accounts, no verified audio recordings, just cameras, silent cameras. And sometimes silence makes a case even more disturbing. The footage reportedly shows Connie and Tony walking into the building together. And this next part keeps coming up in discussions around the case. At some point near the entrance area, Connie allegedly reached toward one of the guards. Not dramatically, not like she was running for help, just reaching out. Some reports describe it almost like she was trying to engage him briefly, and the guard moved away. Now, nobody knows exactly what was going through her mind in that moment. Maybe it meant nothing, maybe she was simply greeting him, maybe she felt awkward. But after her death, people began replaying that tiny moment over and over again online. Because hindsight changes everything. When tragedy happens, even ordinary gestures start feeling loaded with meaning. Then the pair made their way toward apartment C601, 6th floor. Investigators later discovered the apartment had reportedly been booked by someone associated with Tony, not directly under his own name. That detail immediately raised questions. Why use another person to secure the room? Was it convenience? Was it random? Or was someone trying not to leave a direct booking trail? Police are reportedly examining that closely. Now, according to reports, a security guard assisted them with accessing a key box before they entered the apartment around 4:18 a.m. And this is important because once that door closed behind them, the timeline becomes extremely compressed. Everything happened fast, too fast. Investigators say around 4:32 a.m., roughly 14 minutes after entering the apartment, CCTV captured shadows and movement near the doorway, suggesting some sort of disturbance inside the room. Not voices, not clear images, shadows. And honestly, that almost makes it worse because detectives reportedly believe the movement is consistent with a calm conversation. Some reports describe the door being flung open suddenly. Others mention movement that appeared frantic. Again, police have not publicly released the full footage, so investigators are being careful about definitive conclusions. But what's clear is this: something inside that apartment had already shifted. And here's where the timeline becomes difficult to ignore. At approximately 4:34 a.m., one of the guards reportedly entered Apartment C601 briefly. Think about that. A guard does not casually enter an occupied Airbnb unit at 4:30 in the morning for no reason. So what prompted that? Noise? An argument? A complaint? A call from inside? Investigators have reportedly focused heavily on this moment because, according to reports, the guard stayed only briefly, then walked out and lingered near the door for around 2 minutes before leaving. And people online immediately began asking the same question. If there was enough concern to enter the apartment, why was no emergency raised? Why did nobody call the police then? Why did nobody intervene further? And to be fair, we don't know what that guard actually saw. Maybe he thought it was a domestic argument. Maybe he assumed the situation had calmed down. Maybe he didn't want trouble. But after Connie's death, that decision became part of the investigation itself. Then around 4:46 a.m., the same guard reportedly returned briefly to the apartment again. And according to investigators, that is the last confirmed moment Connie was seen alive. Now, pause there for a second. From entry into the apartment to her final confirmed sighting, less than 30 minutes had passed. 30 minutes? That's shorter than this podcast segment. And somewhere inside that half hour, investigators believe things escalated catastrophically.
Kwenda huko, amesimama hivi kwa window. The bedroom window. Something that I didn't even know. It didn't even strike my mind. Yeah? So by the time naenda hivi, amesimama hapo hivyo. I could not save the situation. Nikakimbia hivi. Cha! Akaanguka. The only gap that was there, hiyo time security ametoka hapa anaenda kuweka nini? Token. Yeah? Security anaenda kuweka token. Security alikuja kumtoa, si ndio? Yeah? Security ameenda kuweka token. Juu anasema vitu zake haziko wapi? Haziko intact. So akukuwa na light nini? You get it?
Now, according to the suspect's original account, Connie later jumped from the apartment, but detectives quickly began finding problems with that explanation because the room itself reportedly showed signs of struggle and disarray. Furniture disturbed, movement near the balcony, evidence investigators described as consistent with frantic activity. Then comes another detail investigators reportedly found suspicious. Tony was allegedly seen filming parts of the aftermath, the guards, the scene, even aspects of his own account. And critics immediately questioned whether he was attempting to construct a version of events in real time, almost like someone trying to get ahead of suspicion. Again, that interpretation has not been proven in court, but investigators clearly found enough inconsistencies to shift the case rapidly toward homicide investigations. Now, the final discovery of Connie's body reportedly happened around 5:30 a.m. The sun had barely started rising. Residents were beginning to wake up, and outside the building, on the ground below the 6th floor, was a 22-year-old university student who had walked into that apartment less than an hour earlier. Then at approximately 6:09 a.m., Directorate of Criminal Investigations officers reportedly arrived to process the scene. And from that moment onward, the apartment stopped being an Airbnb. It became a crime scene. For the first few hours after Connie's death, one explanation hovered over everything: suicide. That was reportedly the story initially given at the scene. A young woman, a 6th-floor apartment, a fall, simple. Except once homicide detectives and pathologists started looking closely, the story stopped fitting together. And this is the point where the case shifts from tragic to deeply disturbing, because the autopsy didn't just raise questions, it dismantled the original narrative almost piece by piece. Now, according to reports released after the postmortem examination, Connie had multiple severe injuries, not just injuries from impact. Injuries investigators believe may have happened before she went over that balcony. That distinction matters enormously. According to the findings, pathologists documented a broken left hand, fractures in both legs, abrasions to the head, blunt force trauma to the back, a collapsed left lung. And almost immediately, investigators began asking, how does someone sustain that level of trauma before a fall? Because this wasn't one isolated injury. This was multiple injuries across different parts of the body. Now, let's slow this down for a second. A broken hand can sometimes happen when somebody instinctively tries to shield themselves. Fractured legs before a fall suggest serious force or impact occurring inside the apartment itself. Blunt trauma to the back raises even more questions. And according to reports, detectives began moving away from the idea of a spontaneous jump almost immediately after reviewing those findings. Then there's the issue of timing. Investigators reportedly believe some injuries occurred before Connie fell from the building. That changes the entire sequence of events, because now the critical question becomes, what happened inside apartment C601 before she went over the edge? Was there a fight? Was she trying to escape? Was she physically restrained? Did the violence escalate suddenly or gradually over those final minutes? And honestly, one of the most haunting details in this entire case is how short the timeline was. Connie entered the apartment shortly after 4:18 a.m. By around 5:30 a.m. she was dead, barely over an hour, which means investigators believe whatever happened inside that room unfolded extremely fast. Now, another thing detectives reportedly focused on was the condition of the apartment itself, because according to reports, the room was not orderly after the incident. There were signs described as consistent with struggle or frantic movement near the balcony area. And this detail matters because physical scenes tell stories, and each room suggests one thing, a disturbed room suggests another. Furniture placement, broken items, movement patterns. Crime scene investigators study all of it. And according to reports, detectives did not believe the scene matched a calm interaction before a sudden suicide. Instead, the environment reportedly suggested chaos. Now, there's another layer to this. Alcohol. Toxicology reports reportedly confirm Connie had consumed alcohol that night, and almost instantly, social media became ugly. Some people began using that information to imply recklessness or impaired judgment, but investigators reportedly pushed back against the idea that alcohol explained the physical evidence, because intoxication does not explain broken limbs sustained before a fall. It does not explain blunt force trauma, and this is something that happens often in cases involving women. The victim's behavior gets examined more aggressively than the violence itself. People start asking, Why was she out late? Why did she go there? Why meet someone online? Instead of asking the important question, why was violence allegedly inflicted on her? And as the autopsy details spread quickly, anger across Kenya intensified, especially among young women, because many people saw themselves in Connie, a late-night meetup, an unfamiliar apartment, trying to trust somebody new. The story felt painfully close to ordinary life. Now, another unsettling detail emerged from investigative reports. Detectives reportedly found several bottles of expensive liquor inside the apartment. And while that alone proves nothing criminal happened, investigators include it as part of reconstructing the atmosphere and timeline inside the room. What was consumed? How much? Who drank what? Those questions matter because toxicology often becomes critical in homicide investigations. Investigators also reportedly continued analyzing the CCTV timestamps along with the post-mortem findings. And that's where things become harder to reconcile with the suspect's account. Because remember, by 4:32 a.m., CCTV allegedly already suggested some form of disturbance inside the apartment. That was barely 15 minutes after check-in. Then security reportedly entered the room briefly at around 4:34 a.m., meaning something had escalated quickly enough to draw outside attention. And yet somehow, according to the initial narrative, Connie later simply jumped. That explanation began collapsing under the weight of the evidence. Then came one of the biggest turning points in public perception. Connie's family publicly rejected the suicide theory firmly. They reportedly pointed to her emotional state before the incident and the severe injuries documented in the autopsy. And honestly, you could feel the shift happening nationally at that point. This stopped being viewed as a mysterious fall. People began calling it what they believed it was, a possible femicide case. And the pressure on investigators intensified immediately. Because once the public hears phrases like pre-fall injuries and blunt force trauma, expectations change. People want arrests, answers, accountability. But homicide cases are rarely simple, especially when key moments happen behind closed doors. And right now, investigators are still trying to answer the most important question of all. What exactly happened inside apartment C601 between 4:18 and 5:30 a.m. that morning? Whenever a case like this explodes publicly, attention eventually narrows towards one person, the last person seen with the victim alive. In Connie's case, that person is Tony Odhiambo, also identified in some reports as Tony Lual, 33 years old. And according to investigators, the man Connie had gone to meet that night. Now, before we continue, this is important. At the time of this recording, Tony remains a suspect. He has not been convicted in court and investigations are still ongoing. But the details emerging around him have raised serious public concern because almost immediately after the case became public, investigators reportedly uncovered information that complicated the picture even further. According to reports, Tony worked for a hair products company. On the surface, nothing unusual there. But then investigators reportedly discovered something far more troubling. At the time Connie died, Tony allegedly had an active warrant of arrest linked to a separate rape case from September 2025 in Kilimani. That revelation hit the public hard, not just because of the allegation itself, but because of what it suggested. According to reports, he had allegedly failed to appear in court in that earlier matter, meaning authorities were already looking for him before Connie's death. And once that became public, people started asking difficult questions. How was someone with an active warrant still moving around freely? How many people around him knew? Did Connie know anything about that history before meeting him? There's no indication publicly that she did. And honestly, that possibility makes the case even more painful because online dating works on limited information. You see curated photos, controlled conversations, selective truths. A person can sound charming for weeks while hiding entire parts of their lives. And according to reports, Connie and Tony had met through a dating site before arranging this meetup in Nairobi. What detectives are now trying to reconstruct is the nature of those conversations leading up to April 26th. How long had they been speaking? Who suggested the Airbnb? Who chose the location? Was Connie hesitant at any point? Those details matter because digital communication often becomes crucial evidence in cases like this. Messages reveal tone, intentions, pressure, manipulation, and investigators are reportedly analyzing all of it. Now, another detail that immediately caught detectives' attention was the Airbnb booking itself. According to reports, Apartment C601 was allegedly not booked directly under Tony's name. Instead, investigators believe it may have been reserved through an associate or friend. That raised immediate suspicion because homicide investigators are trained to notice behavior that distances someone from a location or event. Using another person's identity for accommodation doesn't automatically prove criminal intent, but in the context of everything else, it becomes significant, especially once detectives started piecing together the timeline. Now let's talk about Tony's reported behavior after Connie fell, because investigators and the public have focused heavily on this. According to reports, Tony allegedly began filming aspects of the scene shortly after the incident. The guards, the aftermath, even parts of his own explanation. And this detail unsettled people deeply because investigators reportedly questioned whether the recordings were an attempt to create supporting evidence for his version of events, almost like somebody trying to establish innocence before investigators had even fully processed the scene. Again, we need to be careful here. People react unpredictably under stress. There's no universal, normal response to trauma, but detectives clearly considered the behavior important enough to examine closely. And honestly, homicide investigations often pay attention to things most people overlook. Tone of voice, timing, body language, who calls for help first, who speaks calmly, who appears more focused on explaining than grieving. Those details matter. Now, according to reports, Tony initially maintained that Connie jumped from the apartment, but the more evidence investigators gathered, the harder that explanation became to sustain, because now detectives had CCTV suggesting a disturbance inside the apartment, a room reportedly showing signs of struggle, severe pre-fall injuries documented in the autopsy, contradictions emerging within the timeline itself. And at that point, the investigation reportedly shifted decisively toward homicide. Tony was subsequently arrested and remanded for 10 days at Kilimani police station while investigators completed forensic work and gathered statements. According to current reports, that remand period is nearing its end, with expectations that he will return before Kibera Law Courts to face formal murder charges. Now, something else happened during this period. Public scrutiny exploded online. People began digging through every available detail connected to Tony, his past, his movements, the earlier rape allegations, the booking arrangements, the CCTV footage. And with that came another difficult reality of modern true crime. The internet becomes its own investigation machine, sometimes helpful, sometimes reckless. Rumors spread quickly and verified claims multiply. People begin treating speculation as fact. And that's why it's important to separate confirmed investigative details from online assumptions, because ultimately the burden of proving what happened inside Apartment C601 rests with the evidence, not social media. Still, one thing remains impossible to ignore. Connie entered that apartment alive with Tony Odhiambo in the early hours of April 26. Within roughly an hour, she was dead. And right now, investigators believe the answers to what happened during that missing stretch of time may sit with the man who was inside that apartment with her.
Our niece had multiple injuries on various parts of her body. Her left hand was broken. Her 2 legs were also broken. She had abrasions at the back of her head. And she also had a blunt object at her behind that had poked her. And she also had, there was a problem with I think one of the lungs had collapsed on the left. The stomach was clear, there was nothing much.
Now, through all this, Connie's family has remained firm publicly. They rejected the suicide explanation early on and supported the homicide investigation findings emerging from the autopsy. Family spokesperson Catherine Gumbi reportedly stated that the family believed Connie had been in good spirits before the incident. And you can feel the exhaustion in situations like this, because grieving families are forced to mourn publicly while simultaneously fighting narratives they believe are false. Imagine losing your daughter, then spending days hearing strangers debate whether her death mattered. That's another cruelty true crime rarely talks about. Now, as of May 7, 2026, Connie's body reportedly remains preserved at Kenyatta University Funeral Home while legal and forensic processes continue. The story is not over. The courts are still involved. The investigation is still active. The family is still waiting. And somewhere inside all those unanswered questions is the final hour of Connie's life. An hour investigators are still trying to fully reconstruct. An hour that began with a young woman walking into an apartment building before sunrise and ended with the country demanding answers. Right now, investigators are still piecing together exactly what happened inside Apartment C601 at Kaisa Gardens. And if you know anything connected to this case, especially information regarding the movements of those involved before or after April 26, 2026, you are encouraged to contact Kenyan authorities or the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. Even small details matter. And before we end today's episode, I want to leave you with this. Please take online safety seriously. Share your location with trusted people. Verify who you're meeting. Trust discomfort. And never feel embarrassed for prioritizing your safety, because sometimes instinct notices danger before evidence does. Constance Githinji. Connie was 22 years old, a student, a daughter, a future that should still be here. And whatever happened inside that apartment that night, she deserved to walk out alive. This has been Crime Dopers. I'm Wanja. Stay aware, stay safe, stay alert, and I'll see you in the next case.
Crime Dopers. We don't look away.